This next section of the course is going to touch on diffusion. Diffusion is great because a lot of what we've talked about in this course so far has dealt with soft light and the best applications to use it, and diffusion goes hand in hand with achieving soft light. There's different types of diffusion, and we're going to talk about the best applications when to use one over another. One of my favorite kind of diffusions is fabric diffusion. Fabric diffusion is a category that includes anything that's made out of a fabric material. Anything from a silk, muslin, grids, any of these tend to be what I gravitate towards because I feel like they produce a really beautiful quality of light. And what I love about a lot of these different kinds of fabrics is there's actually different strengths. In one instance, one of my favorites is grid cloth. What's nice about grid cloth is depending on what your source is, you can always go up or down in the strength. So for instance, say I'm keying right here from the left. If I put a big 8x8 diffusion in front of this, maybe 8x8 full grid, I frame up the shot and it's looking a little dark, it's cutting too much light. Say the light's already maxed out. What I can do is I can switch that full grid for a half grid or that half grid for a quarter grid. Being able to walk off the strengths of a fabric diffusion are really, really nice as a DP, because in certain circumstances, you may want to step up its thickness to make it softer and to soak up maybe a bigger light, or you may want to walk it off if you're pushing maybe a smaller unit, but still want to achieve a softer source. Another really cool way to use grid cloth is to stylistically use it to bloom or blow out your windows if you don't want to see what's outside. You'll see this done in a lot of movies and television shows because in most circumstances, those shows are shooting on a set in a soundstage. So if you were to look outside that window in real life, there wouldn't be the outside New York or outside LA. They're shooting inside of a warehouse. So a stylistic way to make it seem like a bright sunny day outside is to put grid cloth on the outside of the window and then shine light illuminating that grid cloth. When you're framed up inside looking towards that window, the viewer thinks that it's just a bright sunny day or a blown out sky, when in fact it really is just a piece of grid cloth diffusion with light shining through it. The next fabric diffusion I love using is muslin. Muslin comes in two different kinds, bleached and unbleached. An easy way to remember that is if you got bleach on your shirt or if you're gonna bleach something, usually it means making it whiter, bleaching your hair, bleaching your clothes. So if you take that sort of way of remembering it and applying it to muslin, bleached muslin is white. It's very similar to maybe a white bed sheet, or I've even, you can get muslin curtains. It appears to the eye much whiter. And unbleached muslin is actually a lot warmer. Just imagine something that hasn't been bleached yet. When these are just different options. I typically lean towards bleached muslin just because I don't want to deal with the warm shift in the fabric. And I've used bleached muslin as a diffusion to put lights through. I've actually used bleached muslin as a bounce because it is so thick that any light hitting it actually will send light back. So not only can you send light through it, but you can bounce light into it. And that's another reason why I think that muslin is very versatile on set, because you can use it one way or the other, where most diffusions you can't, Another really cool use for muslin is using it as a color backdrop for any music video or stylized performance shot. How you would go about doing this is set up a 12x12 or an 8x8 with bleached muslin and put any RGB light. We used a sky panel, but this could be any RGB light behind the muslin, behind your subject and actually have it shine through. What ends up happening is, since the muslin is so thick, it actually ends up soaking up all that color, all that light, and it looks on the camera like a color backdrop. I'm going to end the fabric diffusion section talking about a silk. I've never been a big fan of silks. They do typically get thrown into your sort of preset grit package. So if you're going to a rental house and you're asking for a 1 ton, a 2 ton, a 3 ton, whatever that might be, usually they give you a preset. They give you a poly silk, a double net, a single net, etc. The poly silk, I find, just does not perform the way, or as to my eye at least, as a cinematographer, as well as like a muslin or a grid. What's tricky is A, it soaks up so much light, up to 2 or 3 stops. So if you have a light, imagine putting 3 scrims in front of that light. That's a lot of light loss for diffusion. And every time I've used it, I've just never really liked the quality. Like I said, this is just from my experience, but you know, just sort of the way we're framing this class is we're just sort of giving you our favorites and sort of insights to how we achieve our looks. You might love poly silk, you know, it is a solid diffusion, it comes in most kits, but I do find that if you're gonna lean towards fabric diffusion, grids and all strengths of grids and muslin, bleached or unbleached, are by far our favorites. The next section of diffusion is white diffusion. White diffusion is, the best way to describe it, are smaller 4x4 versions of, you know, a grid or a muslin. Where a grid and muslin are fabric and tend to go in an 8x or, you know, 12x into larger frames, white diffusion typically gets skinned and taped or adhered to a 4x4 frame. So they're smaller by nature, because typically you can't really get a 216 in an 8x or a 216 in a 12x12 frame. These are intended for 4x4 frames, but what I love about these is they're very versatile. There's times where I'm shooting, the sun comes out, I can have someone Hollywood one right above the camera or right above the actor. And you know, frankly, they work really, really well for just throwing in front of like an HMI. So their smaller versatility comes in, you know, to a benefit. And similar to grids, you know, where you have full grid, half grid, quarter grid, there's the same sort of identifier where you have full white diffusion, half white diffusion, and quarter diffusion. The tricky thing is though is the naming. So full white diffusion is called 216, half white diffusion is called 250, and then quarter white diffusion is 251. I know those numbers don't really correlate. There's not really a rhyme or reason to those. You just have to remember them. But what is nice about white diffusion is being able to walk off the strength, the same sort of, you know, mentality of the grids, where say you have a unit, you throw a grid in front of it, maybe it's cutting too much, you can walk the strength off. You can do the same with white diffusion. Say you have a sky panel, you throw 216 in front of it, and it's just cutting too much, you already have the light at 100 points. You can easily switch to 250, which is half white diffusion, and now you're gonna get a lot more light and still kind of maintain a lot of the soft qualities of that family of diffusion. So I guess to sort of wrap that up, white diffusions, 216, 250, 251, are a lot more portable than fabric diffusions. They're come in 4x's. They're great for sort of run and gun instances where you want to throw something in front of a light, Hollywood over an actor, if the sun maybe comes out. Those sort of circumstances are where I think white diffusion comes most in handy. Here's a quick tip that's always come really in handy for me. When I'm shooting exteriors, say I've, you know, framed up my shot, I've got an 8x, you know, say highlight diffusing my actor, and say you're shooting the scene for over an hour. The sun's naturally gonna move. And there's been times where even in the middle of a take or right after a take, the sun's just moved beyond your 8x, and say that 8x is tied down, it's not going anywhere. Unless, you know, you want to take 10 or 15 minutes to move it and you don't have that time. The quick fix is to bring in a 4x4 white diffusion. We've touched on these earlier. A 251 or even lighter, an opal, which is even thinner than 251. Just right next to maybe your 8x will usually do the trick. It yields the same effect as on camera, at least, as highlight, and it's just a quick little fix. Framing up on your actor works really well in a close-up because anything wider, you're gonna see the area of coverage is not that big. But when you're framed up on your subject and the light just creeps beyond a building, maybe just creeps just beyond your diffusion, sneaking in a little 4x4 251 or opal, skinned in a 4x4 frame, is a lifesaver. Diffusion for exteriors. This one can be tricky because in a lot of ways it depends on the time of day and the effect you're going for. If you want to really feel the sun, but you want to take the edge off the sun, highlight is a great option. Highlight actually fits in a unique family where it's not a white diffusion and it's not a fabric diffusion. It's actually a frost. But the frosts look really great in sun because typically, say I'm sitting outside, I'm getting hit with bare sun. If you were to fly in a grid or a muslin, it is so thick, it absorbs so much light that it actually makes your actor on camera appear as if they're under shade because it's cutting so much light that it no longer feels like a sunny day. And this is tricky because if you're DPing and you still want to feel like a sunny day, you just don't like how unflattering the sun looks, you just want to soften it a little bit, highlight is a great go-to. In some places, some rental houses maybe don't have highlight, but there's an identical one just made by a different manufacturer called Half Soft Frost. So highlight or Half Soft Frost are almost identical, can be interchanged, and they still give the same effect. One last tip when you're shooting outside and you are using these larger diffusion frames is to tie down your frames. These frames, if you think about a large diffusion frame, it functions very similar to a sail on like a sailboat. It's gonna catch any wind or gust that may come that way. So beyond just putting sandbags on your stands, I highly recommend if you are using an 8x or a 12x to tie them down to a heavy object or a tent stake just to keep everything safe when you are shooting outside.